Hello, I'm Chris Fowler, and welcome to SportsCentury. When he squatted behind the plate wearing his tools of ignorance, he resembled a fire hydrant. And when he stood up, he still resembled a fire hydrant. But as funny as number 8 appeared in Yankee pinstripes, it usually got funnier when he opened his mouth. Among his most quoted lines was, "It ain't over till it's over." But as we'll see in the next half hour, when it really was over for Yogi Berra, he not only owned more World Series records than many more heralded players, he had gained a special place deep in the heart of American pop culture.
Yogi would have been remembered as a Hall of Fame baseball player, which he should be. But what he has been able to do is move beyond that, and where he is now an icon.
Everybody quotes him, from the president right on down. He's probably the most quoted individual in the country.
Yogi Berra once said, when you come to a fork in the road, take it.
They feel that my dad actually sits around and tries to make these up. They just come out, they are his language, and they are Yogi Berra.
I want to give some of my favorite advice to the graduates. Never give up, because it ain't over till it's over.
I think it appeals to the anti-intellectual taste of the American public. They're not going to quote Plato or Aristotle, but they are going to quote Yogi Berra because he's a hero and a sage.
If you're an advertiser and you want to sell your product, who better to put out in front of America as an authentic face?
Who in the heck is this guy Philharmonic?
One of the guys once asked Yogi what time it was. He said, right now.
When the wife of the mayor of New York City says that he looks very cool in his new summer suit, Yogi says, thanks, you don't look so hot yourself.
He comes back from a road trip. He asks his wife what she did. She said, I went to see Dr. Zhivago. He said, what's wrong with you now?
If I had to use one word to describe Lawrence Peter Laude Yogi Berra, is underrated. Don't worry about how he says it. Just go to the bank, whatever he says.
If you say to Yogi, what basically did sports mean to you when you were a kid? He would say, look, it was always, who are we playing, what is the sport, where do we meet?
Yogi was the best player, and when you choose up sides with the bat, the first words I used to always hear when the hand got to the top was, I'll take Laude.
Lawrence Peter Berra was born on May 12, 1925, in a predominantly Italian section of St. Louis, known during his childhood days of the Depression by an ethnic slur, Dago Hill.
When we went out to play, the first thing you'd hear those other guys say is, watch those Dago kids, they'll steal everything. I mean, because we didn't have anything.
Moms and dads on the hill, they didn't believe in the kids going out to play ball. I mean, let's go to work.
My oldest brother was the best ball player in our family. In fact, all three of my brothers could have gone play ball. And my dad said, go to work. I worked in a shoe factory. I worked in a coal yard. I worked on a Coca-Cola truck. But I quit a lot of the jobs because I wanted to play ball.
Yogi would always find himself out on the lot at lunchtime playing ball instead of having lunch. In fact, he lost his first job by going out to playing ball on the lot and forgetting to go back to work.
Dad would be in the middle of a baseball game, and he had to run home and have that beer on the table for his dad. If that beer wasn't there, Dad used to get a beating.
I think he was kind of afraid of his reaction, but that didn't stop him. That's all that boy ever wanted to do was play ball.
Quitting school after the 8th grade, Berra tore up the local Sandlot Baseball League from spring to fall. A boyhood friend gave him a nickname that would eventually become part of the public consciousness.
The kids the day before had gone to an Indian movie, and a yoga, Y-O-G-A, had been in the movie, and the yoga was a person who sat with his hands clasped like this and his legs like that and just staring straight ahead.
We didn't have no dugouts. And I sat on the ground, I always had my arm folded and my legs crossed. And Bobby says, you look like a yogi. And it stuck.
Named after a movie snake charmer, Yogi would need magical powers to persuade his immigrant parents, Pietro and Paulina, that he had a future in baseball.
They didn't want him to go away and play baseball because he was a contributor to the family.
Yogi's brother, Lefty, was a better hitter than Yogi, if that be possible. He saw the potential in Yogi, and he almost fought his father. Let him go play. Let's see how good he is.
With his brother Lefty running family interference, Yogi and Joe Garagiola attended an open tryout held by the Cardinals in the summer of 1941.
I can remember pitching batting practice to Yogi, and you could tell he was hitting them off that roof, off the screen in the right field.
It was 310 feet down the line, and he would just pick up any bat that was laying there. He was hitting them on the roof at Sportsman's Park.
GM Branch Rickey offered Yogi $250 to sign with St. Louis, but the 16-year-old declined because Garagiola had been given $500. 2 years later, the Cardinals' loss would prove to be the Yankees' gain.
When they came over to sign Yogi, our priest, Father Kester, and two of my brothers stayed home from work and that to make sure my dad would let him sign. And he told Yogi he was making $90 a month. He said, if you can't live on that, you have to come home and go to work.
After playing for the Norfolk Tars of the Piedmont League, Berra's baseball career was interrupted by a call to war.
June 6, 1944, and the greatest armada in military history is assembled in England for an assault on Hitler's fortress Europe. As they prepare to move in, 500 warships lay down a withering barrage.
It looked like 4th of July to me. It really did. Yeah. I wasn't scared. It looked so beautiful, all different colors, like fireworks. And my house said, you better get your damn head down in here. You want it on.
Surviving the fireworks off Omaha Beach on D-Day, Berra was discharged from the Navy in May of 1946. Changing uniforms, the free-swinging catcher was assigned to the Newark Bears. At the end of the season, he arrived in the Bronx. Squat and long-armed, he hardly fit the prototype of a Yankee.
They're always elegant, and you have this sense of a dynasty. And here you have this short, squat guy. One of his teammates called him the Ape.
Everybody laughed because he looked so funny in a uniform. You just wouldn't think a guy like that could play.
Duke Snyder found a magazine article, and it had a caveman dragging his big club behind him. So Duke tears this out, and in the World Series, he goes up to the plate, and he slips this to Yogi.
Yogi took a tremendous amount of ribbing, but if you let it show, the ribbing gets worse. So he hit it as well as anybody.
He's a very sensitive person. The things that they said, they were just hurtful. And I know that it bothered him, and it should have bothered him.
Considered a defensive liability, Berra was tutored by former Yankees catcher Bill Dickey, who was brought in by new manager Casey Stengel in 1949. Stengel also stemmed the flow of clubhouse ethnic abuse.
Stengel used to refer to Yogi as his assistant manager.
What Stengel appears to have seen in Berra is a man who walked, talked, ate, breathed baseball.
And now Casey Stengel is going out to talk to Berra. Not going out to talk to Reynolds, he's talking to Yogi.
Casey Stengel hollered out to Yogi, use your head, use your head. And Yogi looked at him and says, if you want to call a game, come on, you catch. Yogi would talk back to Stengel.
Casey would whistle, and then he'd say, turn around here, damn it, turn around here. Yogi wouldn't look back. Damn it, he said, if you want to call one pitch, call them all. I'm not turning around. Well, you go to hell, you go to hell. And they went back and forth.
If the marriage between Stengel and Berra was sometimes volatile, it led to unprecedented success. 5 straight World Series titles from 1949 to 1953. In the first game of the 1955 series, Yogi thought he put the tag on every catcher's nemesis.
1 run in the 8th, and Jackie Robinson on 3rd. The windup, and here comes Robinson, trying to steal home. He's safe, says the ump. He's out, says Yogi Berra, and brother, is Yogi hopping.
Yogi blocked the plate. You look at it. He had the ball there, and Jackie slid right into it.
He never got to the plate. He got there, but after I tagged him.
By 1956, Berra had won 3 MVP awards and had led the Yankees in RBIs for 7 straight seasons. That October, he called the most brilliant pitching performance in World Series history.
There comes the pitch. Strike 3. A no-hitter, a perfect game for Don Larson.
If you want to know about his competitiveness, look at that picture of Don Larson. And Yogi's got his legs and his arms wrapped around him. I mean, it's almost X-rated. He's hugging him so closely.
You go to a schoolhouse that's 150 years old and you see this cornerstone
there that you know it's still going to be there 200 years from now. That's what Yogi was to the Yankees. He was immovable.
And this guy here, to me, is just as fine a clutch hitter as I've ever seen in the game today of baseball. He does a tremendous job.
A high drive, that's trouble. And Yogi Berra belts one over the screen and into Bedford Avenue, and the ball game is even.
Casey would go up to the trainer and ask if anybody's sick or anything. He said, well, Yogi Berra's going to stay home. He don't feel good. And Casey says, you better bring him back to the ballpark. He came to the ballpark that day, and in the ninth inning, he pinch hit and hit a home run and beat Billy Pierce 2-1.
A notorious bad ball hitter, there were few pitches Berra couldn't hit, high, low, inside, or outside. And he never struck out more than 38 times in a season.
Best way to pitch a Yogi is throw a ball right down the middle of the plate. You're going to have just as good a luck if you throw it on the corner or down his knees or up around his armpits.
I know Casey sometime would fall off on the bench because he would take a ball down the middle, you know, and the score side, and then he'd golf one out of the ballpark.
Newcomb won 27 games in 56. World Series, fastball by his ankle, Yogi, home run. Next time up, over his head, home run.
Those two homers in Game 7 beat the Dodgers in 1956. If both eyes were on the ball at crunch time, one was always on his bank account.
One of Yogi's gimmicks was he would go with Casey up to the ownership of the Yankees at the World Series victory party. Who had a few drinks, they were in a good mood, and Casey would say to the owners, take care of Yogi. And they would say, okay, you know, we're going to give him a $5,000 raise. And Yogi would say, I want $7,000. All right, give him $7,000.
The mistake people make about Yogi Berra is that they suggest that he's somehow a clown. He's not. He's very smart. He is very shrewd. He is very crafty, and he's very lovable.
One of the reporters of the Associated Press, come World Series time, would always be cooking up non-existent trades. So at the time, we said, what would be the most outrageous thing that people would think of? We said, how about Yogi Berra as manager? No one would ever think of Yogi Berra as a manager.
But in October of 1963, Berra was handed the reins of the team when manager Ralph Houck was elevated to GM. After setting records on the field with 10 World Championship rings and 71 hits in the Fall Classic, Yogi now had to lead from the dugout.
Ralph Houck came up and told me, how do you like to manage? I said, manage who? I said, the Yankees. I said, you kidding?
The players who he had been teammates of in the earlier years in the 60s, there was no line between them and the manager the way there should have been. This was just Yogi.
On August 20th, 1964, the Yankees fell to 4.5 games out of first place after getting swept by the White Sox. The weather changed abruptly on the way to O'Hare Airport.
On the team bus, I started playing a harmonica. But I heard Yogi say, shove that harmonica up, you know, where? And I had never seen him angry, ever. He came run up the aisle and was like, here, take it. I threw it to him. He caught it, and he threw it like he was throwing out a runner, and he hit Pepitone in the knee. I went into the clubhouse in Boston and knocked on his door. He says, well, I got to find you, Phil. Is $250 enough?
The Yankees won 30 of their final 43 to win the pennant by a game over Chicago. But the late season surge was not enough.
His teammates gave him no respect. Their boss was still Ralph Houck, who was sitting up in the front office.
He was never going to be accepted by Ralph Houck because Ralph was the third string catcher on the Yankees in the 50s. There was always a clash there of two Yankee cultures, Houck and Yogi.
The day after New York lost to the Cardinals in 7 games, Houck summarily relieved Berra of his duties. After 19 seasons in pinstripes, Yogi went home to New Jersey in shock.
He really felt in his heart that he was going back to sign an extension to the contract and got slapped in the face terribly, treated horribly.
The firing of this lovable figure caused a kind of national revolution among fans that this kind of funny-looking guy who won the pennant would be fired instead of rewarded. And I think that was the best thing that ever happened to Yogi.
The next spring, Yogi was back in uniform as a coach under Stengel, who was managing the Mets. 7 years later, Berra was tapped again for the top spot after the sudden death of iron-willed Gil Hodges in April of 1972.
The organization started to go to hell in a handbasket as soon as Gil died. The strength came out of that organization, the one that could walk in an office and say no. And Yogi wasn't that kind of individual. He was, for the want of a better word, cuddly.
If he was struggling and he had to take you out of the lineup, I think Yogi felt as bad as the player coming out of the lineup.
Gary Kuzma was pitching in San Francisco, and Yogi started out, and he was going to change pitches. And Kuzma stood on the mound and yelled at him, "Don't you dare come out here." And Yogi turned around and went back.
We were leading 2-1 against the Phillies, and Seaver said, if I have to face Bill Robinson in the 9th, I'm going to have Yogi bring you in. And so I went behind underneath and started throwing against the wall. And sure enough, here comes Bill Robinson. Seaver calls timeout. And he says, Yogi Tucker ought to come in here and take care of this last out. And Yogi says, he's not ready yet. He says, oh yeah, he is.
In 1973, Berra's improbable managing style again got results as the Mets charged to a pennant. But less than 2 years after losing the World Series to Oakland in 7 games, Yogi was sacked. Then in 1984, after 8 years as a Yankees coach, Berra dutifully responded to a third managerial call, this one from George Steinbrenner.
I won the pennant with the Yankees and the Mets, but there's one thing I haven't achieved, win the World Series.
With the boss running the operation, Berra began to show some wear and tear in the spring of 1985. Despite a promise by Steinbrenner that the Yankee legend would finish the season as manager, the relationship between the two would continue to deteriorate.
George was telling him who to play. When they were losing, George would say, this is your team, and Yogi said, no, this is your team. You're the one who handpicked these players.
I was doing Game of the Week, and I went in there, and I said, yo, you look awful. This guy's killing you. And he said, no, he's okay. We just agree different.
We all kind of sensed that George was being a little bit impatient with them, and we knew that we didn't play well pretty quick, that something could happen.
In late April, the Yankees' record fell to 6-10, following a 3-game sweep by the White Sox.
I remember after the game, going into the clubhouse, I saw Clyde King, and Clyde King calls me over and says that they had to let your dad go. So I said, who? I actually said this. I said, who did that? Who fired him? Like, not knowing it was George.
I relied on my general manager because I was tied up in something else in business. I said, well, get a hold of Yogi, tell him we're sorry, but we're going to make a change.
That's what made me get mad at him, because he never told me. He sent somebody else to come down that I was fired, and I didn't like that.
Dad got on our team bus, and he was supposed to go. Dad got up and said, see you later, guys, and then the rest of the team stood up and clapped for him as he got off the bus. And that's how Dad exited from the Yankees.
Was he educated? No, he's not educated. But he's educated by the streets. He's educated by his upbringing. As much as Yogi was a Yankee, Yogi is a guy who believes in right and wrong.
Wounded by his unceremonious departure, Berra promised never to return to Yankee Stadium so long as Steinbrenner was in command.
We began getting piles of letters from fans saying, don't be so selfish, Yogi. You think only of yourself. What about us? We want to see you at Yankee Stadium.
Yankee fans love him, and they wanted him there, and he wanted to go there, but he felt like he had been wronged.
If you ever looked at something and know that something was missing, I always felt that about Yogi. Joe D, when he heard about we were trying, I remember him telling me, that's good, get him back here.
In December 1998, a dialogue of reconciliation began with a request by Steinbrenner to visit the Yogi Berra Museum near the Hall of Famer's home in Montclair, New Jersey.
When I told that to Dad, he jumped through the ceiling. He said, I don't give a damn, there's no way, no way. I don't care if George wants to come here, I ain't going back. And I said, Dad, the man is willing to come here, put his reputation on the line, and apologize to you in person.
Mr. Steinbrenner, you remember Mr. Berra? Mr.
Yes,
Berra,
we
you remember
each
Mr.
other.
Steinbrenner?
I should have called Yogi, no question about it, if we were going to make a change. So what I did is later try to go back and bring Yogi back to New York, to Yankee Stadium. One of the greatest moves I ever was dumb enough not to have made earlier.
When the boss delivered his formal apology at the museum, Berra softened and came in from the cold after 14 seasons.
Let's welcome home number 8, Yogi Berra, number 8.
He comes out to, I think he's throwing out the first pitch, and the whole Yankee Stadium was like, saying, Yogi, Yogi, and it was just amazing. I got the chills.
That summer, Yogi Berra was honored with his own day at Yankee Stadium.
There was Yogi and Don Larson reenacting the final pitch of Larson's World Series perfect game. And it couldn't be happening, but on that day, Cone goes out and pitches a perfect game.
Here at Yankee Stadium on Yogi Berra Day.
The best line I ever heard regarding Yogi was when Yogi was born, God said, Yogi, you just breathe, I'll take care of the rest.
We used to think that Yogi was somehow the magic charm. One time we were on a flight coming home from St. Louis and Yogi had stayed over. I mean, it was really storming and lightning off the wings. And when the guys realized that Yogi wasn't on the flight, it sent a little bit of fear, because if Yogi were there, the plane's not going to go down with Yogi on the plane.
Casey Stengel said, everything that Dad touches turns to gold. Casey said, well, Yogi has 3 great kids, lives in an affluent town in a mansion. There's nothing dumb about that.
I've never met anyone who was more completely at peace with himself and what he was as Yogi Berra is.
There's no story about him that isn't wonderful. He was indeed a character of his time and of his sport, and is going to live in the legends of our time.
If Berra had gone into acting, he'd have been known as a natural scene stealer. At least once, his performance was X-rated. After Ryan Duran beat the Milwaukee Braves in Game 6 of the 1958 World Series, the power pitcher was interviewed for 15 minutes for the Today Show. But what he saw on TV the next morning was closer to 15 seconds. The reason? Throughout much of the interview, Yogi had been in the background of the cameraman's shot, buck naked. On the field and off it, Yogi Berra was always himself. For SportsCentury, I'm Chris Fowler.